It's easy, and you just will pop quiz.
I get graded on this one?
No, you don't. We get an A+, so you can say that right off the top. This is Mr. Earl Weeks, and we're going to have a conversation with him. He's from the class of 1952, and we are at Forels Brady Strike Lang, and the date is May 24th, 2002. So I want to first talk a little bit about law school, your law school experience, and it's always interesting for the students to hear from other lawyers. Why did you choose to go to law school? What went into it, and all that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, let me just start out by saying that I was raised in Nebraska. What the part that plays is nothing but the fact that I spent a lot of time at my grandfather's farm. I was raised in Omaha, the city, the big city, you know. But I always considered myself a boy from Nebraska. Never really thought I'd get anywhere like college, let alone law school. Better have a drink.
What size family?
Beg pardon?
Big family, little family?
Mine, sole child.
Oh, spoiled.
You bet. So anyway, then the service interrupted. I started at the University of Omaha, which was then the University of Omaha, not at Nebraska or Nebraska at Omaha. And I didn't complete the semester because my stepfather, who had recently married my mother, decided he wanted to go into business in Phoenix, and she agreed. That was fine with her, and they gave me the option that I could stay there and finish the semester, and in fact finish the year if I wanted to, or I could go with them. Well, I always tell this now because they're both deceased, so they don't know, or else they do know. I was flunking out. I knew I was. I hadn't studied for anything. Pearl Harbor, you can imagine, the 7th. Then you go into the Christmas season, and the exams are afterwards, of course, the old way, in January where you took exams. And so I said, yeah, I'd like to go, you know. So that took care of that. We got to Phoenix, and folks opened a shop, is what it was, and skipping right along, I helped them to a point where business wasn't that good, and I said, well, I better get a job, so I did. I went to work for Western Electric, which is an installer of equipment for a telephone company. And then in the fall, I signed up for Phoenix Junior College, and loaded up with 18 hours. I remember Coach Hoy telling me, and he's the one the field is named for up here, Phoenix College, is Coach Hoy. And he's saying, you're foolish, you're going to go into the service. He says, you might as well have fun and play football. And I signed up for 18 hours, you know, I wasn't very sensible. And then I proceeded to have a lot of fun on campus and so forth. Unfortunately, the Army took me in December with a, you know, we want you, and I was in the service by the 3rd or 5th of January in MacArthur. So that's the way I got started on that. But the interesting part is in that fall semester, at the school break before Christmas, they had a bulletin board notice. Maybe these kids will realize how important like that can be. It said that all returning GIs could get a free aptitude test. And there were 4 of us standing there, and we said, well, we won't pass it up, it's free. So we all took the aptitude test. Now, mind you, we were all in the either beginning engineering or architectural or something. I was in architecture. And so we had different ideas right then as to what we wanted to be. And that was all right. We took it. We came back a few days later when they told us to and interviewed us individually. And they had charts and everything else, but the bottom line was that the top thing for me was law. And dentistry was second. And I think architecture was third. And he convinced me, as a gentleman, that I would really enjoy law more. I wouldn't be tied down to a drawing board and so forth. He didn't tell me about those years when you're tied down to a desk. Unless you're a trial attorney, then you're coming and going back and forth. So I switched immediately to pre-law in the second semester of Phoenix Junior College and never looked back. I went on, I decided I had to major in something, undergraduate, so I went business. And I had within 6 units of getting a accounting degree when I had the option of applying so many hours of the first semester of law on my degree. Well, I was an honor student before they applied those. After they did, I wasn't an honor student. That's what happens when you get nothing but, I didn't get anything lower than a C in college, but I'm not proud of that at all, because I'd had A's and B's or otherwise.
How long were you in the service?
3 years, just about 3 years to a day.
And then just went back to school after the war ended?
Yes, and I married before I went back to school. It was a joint discussion, me and my wife, what was I going to do, and we both concluded I could really not train to do anything. So she was working for Department of Agriculture, and she said, I'll keep working and you go to school. So that's the way it worked. And it worked out all right. I got my business degree and graduated with a class of 50. I think it would have been 49 otherwise, but having to wait for this first semester or so forth. I actually was a class of 50 on that, and then 52 I got my law degree. But important thing I'd say to people that are listening to this is that aptitude, I think, is vitally important. That sold me. That convinced me when he told me everything that he had looked into and all the different things he'd evaluated, and including my own personality and things that he had talked to me about, so he'd know who I was and such. And I pass the word on when I can to anybody that they ought to take some kind of an aptitude test and stick with it. I even took it a second time after I'd finished my business as a backup, just to see if I was right, and they said, law's it.
Did you have any lawyers in your family?
No.
So.
No.
Didn't
You
know
go
what
ahead
you
and
were
ask
getting
questions
into.
now.
No, you didn't know what you were getting into then, really.
No, and I never convinced any of my children to become lawyers, and they didn't.
How many children do you have?
Well, I had 6. One's deceased, the oldest boy. I have 5, 3 girls and a boy. And they've gone different ways. They've all gotten degrees, but and never bothered me. I did not want to sell them on something that they didn't want to be sold on.
Well, tell me about law school. What your vivid recollections are of it, or your
I was
classmates.
scared to death. I never had that much confidence, I guess, at any given time. I just
Sorry.
went along with things the way they were, and thinking, well, give it a go, and so I did. And of course, being married had its very definite advantages, and then on the other hand, maybe it kept you from doing as much studying as you'd like to, but even so, it all worked out fine. But my wife realized she was pregnant in the fall of '47, and of course I hadn't even gotten, I think, halfway through business right then. So she, at the end of about December of '47, came up here and stayed with my parents until she delivered. I finished the semester that semester and then laid out one semester because I knew I was going to have to get some money and take care of expenses and so forth, and our expenses. So I laid out for the spring of '48, and then went back to summer school, and I remember taking life-saving of all things, and later got a job at the university. As a matter of fact, I was, no, I take it back, not at the university, but I did get a job on the basis for life-saving. It was at, what's your big field down there? Air Car.
Davis-Monthan.
Davis-Monthan.
And I was in the officers' pool. And that was a riot because there's not as many people attending there as there are the others.
What do you remember about your classmates? You're fine.
Well, you soon knew who were the smart ones because they knew enough to ask questions and not wait to be asked, you know. Some of us, I think, sat lower in our chair hoping that maybe he wouldn't notice us. And it was usually a he. I don't think we had any women, no. So some of them like Charlie Ayers, and I list him right at the top. Henry Kiker, who you heard of, outstanding. And there were many more that really were very good at it. I remember tossing pennies out in front of the law school. I even mentioned that when I was on the bus tour. I said, well, that's what part of my time was taken, was tossing pennies. We'd have a break, and so everybody would get out there and toss for the line. Professors, I remember. Chester Smith, I'll always remember. God bless him. He, of course, taught the review course out in his backyard since it was summertime. And so it was a night course, whatever lighting he could give us. And he did a beautiful job, because I don't think he lost a one that year. I don't know, but I don't think he did. So, you got Walter Chaifetz, you met. Came into my life a little sooner because in '49, at the time we were going into law school, we were also qualifying for the Polo Village. Have you heard of the Polo Village? Oh, that's too bad, but she says yes. Polo Village was a bunch of Quonset huts that had been bought by the university from the Army. And they were the strictly, if you never saw them, you'd never forget them. They're round, they have those metal type of material that is like this, is the only way I can describe it. And that's the siding, and that's the roof on it, and so forth. It's a round roof. And you had one bedroom and one bath, very small. And then you had the front room, which was the living room and the kitchen all combined. And if you had furniture, it was $18 a month, and if you had your own furniture, it was $24. No, the reverse. You paid $24 a month, and that was everything, utilities and all included. So that saved us. Well, Walter and I happened to have Quonset huts side by side, and so we naturally got acquainted. Because he was in law school and I was in law school. And I'll never forget, he had tried to raise tomatoes. I said something to Ruth about that, and she said, well, he never did. And I said, oh, I thought he convinced me that he had some nice ripe tomatoes. I apparently wasn't paying much attention to tomatoes then. So I really got to know Walter. There might have been a few others that were in our law school, but I don't recall that again. How many might have been veterans, and I think that was a qualification. You had to be a veteran in order to probably get the housing, and married. Anything else?
What do you remember about Dean Lyon?
Wonderful guy, wonderful guy. Just, so friendly to students and everybody else, and just top notch. I'm not sure I took a course from him though. I can't remember that. I can remember the others. You'd have to cite the names, and I could say yes. Freezer, Torts. Yeah, I think it's Freezer or something like that. And Barnes. Mm-hmm. Well, Brown for
Claude
evidence.
Brown. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Claude Brown, and had at least one non-professor that was a practicing attorney, and I'm not sure of his name now.
Ashby Lowe's?
No.
He taught there for a while,
Did
I
he?
know. So were you in the Douglas building? Was it, what did the law school look like then? Where was it?
It's the same one that's there now. It's the old one, although it's not a law school.
Mm-hmm.
It's right next to
Centennial
the
Hall.
auditorium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Douglas building.
I called it the auditorium, across from the library.
Right.
Yeah, okay. And yeah, that's whatever they called it. It was the law school, and didn't have air conditioning. We took our exam in the basement of the law school with evaporative cooling, and it wasn't very effective. We started in the morning. I think we took advantage of the hours, you know, as it gets going. And they said you can take as much time as you want to on your own, but you have to complete this, I think, in 4 hours, something like that. And we had been told that before we went there. So I came in with a jug of orange juice that we had, you know, squeezed and put in there. And I had that in my typewriter, which I had typing, and that's what carried me through the Army. Actually, I would have been killed as an infantryman if they hadn't discovered my talent as a typist, and that saved my neck. But it also saved my neck in law school, because it's all the difference in the world. You could sit there longer and study that question than the others who start to write, you know. And you almost, the first time you do this, you feel nervous. My God, they're already writing and you're not even doing anything. But the point was that when you sat down and started thinking about it, you just click, 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 and it went like that. And it went beautifully. And then once you got through the first test or so, you knew what to expect. That you could take longer to develop what you're going to say and look back at the question to be sure you covered it. And besides, I remembered what the professor said, whichever brilliant one said that. We're going to grade your thing according to whether we can read it. If we can't read it, you don't know anything. Mm-hmm. If you type, you probably are going to come out all right unless you're a lousy typist. So I thought, boy, that's my cup of tea. So that tells you about, you know, like the first exams and so forth, and how you get through those. And I didn't have much, I don't remember studying with anybody, because I lived in a closet, Walter did, and we were just the same kind of people, I guess. We were married, and you know, by the way, I mentioned the child, he was in the Little Bear School. It's still there on the campus. They drove by, and they couldn't believe it because it's closed down, but it's called the Little Bear School. And that's where a bunch of the kids, my oldest one, went through nursery school while I was in business and then in law school. And I don't know if I deviated from where I was supposed to be at this point.
Where's Little Bear School? I don't know where that is.
Is it right on campus, or is
It's on campus.
Whereabouts?
It's somewhere around Cherry, probably,
Okay.
but it's south of Speedway.
Okay.
So it's on the old campus,
Okay.
very definitely.
Okay.
It's on the north side of the street as
Okay.
you're going by.
Okay.
I can't tell you the street.
Okay. Is it inside the walls, the old walls?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it would be inside the old walls. That's true.
So what'd you do when you finished up law school? What'd you do first?
Okay, when I finished up law school, that means when you had your final exams and so forth.
Right.
Then you started studying for the exam, for the bar.
It was given that summer, right?
And, beg pardon?
Was it given that summer?
That summer, yes. Oh yes, we graduated in May, I think it was. And we started the evening courses probably in June. And so then that's all you did was go to those sessions and read your notes and read all the different things he gave you, and move on, because you had to keep abreast of the class, but you had to learn as much as you could, knowing that when it was through, it was only a few days until you're going to take the bar. And
Did pretty much everybody take his course?
yes, yes. In fact, the word you heard was that if you didn't care whether you passed or not, why go ahead and try it without Smith, because he charged so much money. You know, I suppose some of them thought that was awfully high, but I didn't question it, and I'm sure most of the...
Do you remember how much he charged? Do you remember how much he charged?
I would say several $100s, I think, but I don't know for sure.
Though
In other words, an amount that I think was kind of large for our group of people. And there were veterans in there, but not too many of them. I was the old man in the class. Yeah, gray hair. I had gray hair at 19, see. So I had a full head of gray hair by the time I'd gotten into, going into law school especially. And so I got roused about it, you know, the old man. And I tell you the rest of the story is that it was either Bill Andrews or Dale, let's see, Dale Andrews or Bill Andrews and Dale Miranda. They were the two young ones, as far as I was concerned, and I always got the razzing and so forth. And one of them came up to me when we were walking along the street, you know, coming different directions, and stopped me, and he said, boy, he said, I sure wish I had some of that gray hair you have. I said, what's the matter? He says, oh, they don't take me serious in these interviews. And I thought, well, that sums it up. I didn't have to say any word, you know, nothing to answer him because he was deflated. He realized that it did help, and I think it did help. I think that when I interviewed with some of the lawyers, and one of the first ones was Henderson Stockton, an old-time lawyer, and I think that probably he would not have been impressed with either one of those guys. They're nice guys, but I think they thought they were a little too young. I think I was more the type that I just want a chance to show what I can do, and I'll work hard and that sort of thing. But
were there any, just one more thing about your classmates, you know there were the two women, were there any other minorities in your class that you remember?
no. Let me think about that.
What year was Castro?
49.
I was thinking of Hispanic, no blacks, I'm sure, but Hispanics, I don't believe we had any. No, I don't think so.
Probably not, but just curious. So you finished up the bar and then interviewed, whom did you work with first?
Oh, well, the first job I got was clerk of Supreme Court. I came up right after the bar exam. I had my car packed and everything. And by the way, I didn't tell you this, but it does enter in at this point to mention that. In '49, my wife had worked in Tucson in the trust department, and she actually got that job because she'd been working for Valley Bank in the trust department up in Phoenix. And she became acquainted with a guy named Cleon T. Knapp, and he was on the Board of Regents and just about Mr. Everything, Mr. University of Arizona. He kind of ran it, and so he proceeded to hire a coach. I never heard that the rest of the trustees ever had anything to say about it, you know, and he was on the trustees. Bob Winslow from USC, and then the next thing he knew, he had to have a secretary for her. So he didn't let her interview, he just called his office and said, let's get hold of Betty Weeks, and said, how would you like to go to work as secretary? I forget what she was doing then. She might not have even been employed right then. And that was in the fall of, well, that was in the summer of '49. And so she became the secretary of the football coach. And that's an interesting story too. But anyway, she wanted to give Bob Winslow proper notice, so she agreed to finish up another couple of months. So I got in the car, and I guess our son stayed down in Tucson with somebody else that was caring for him. And I drove to Phoenix and stayed with my folks. And then the next day, you know, you start walking the beat. And I had hit all the law firms, including the one that I ultimately became a partner of. It was then known as Kramer, Roach and Perry when I interviewed. At least I think it was. It might have been one of the older names, but I know it was Kramer, Roach and Perry because that's what it was when I became attorney in that firm in 1957. And Schnell and Welmer and Jennings Strauss and Louis Roca, I've been to all of them. As a matter of fact, I did some summer work for Louis Roca. That was part-time, and it was while I was doing that I was, I think, in the library of Louis Roca, and Walter Chaifetz came in, and he said, I understand that Judge Stanford of the Supreme Court is looking for a law clerk. He says, I suggest you go out there and maybe you can get a job. Because he knew I wasn't, on permanent, and going to have to find something to do after they finish this one project. So I went out and interviewed Judge Stanford. He hired me. Wonderful guy. Of course, that's because he hired me, but actually that he saw past all my failures or such, I felt. I law clerked for him from about August of 1952 to about May of 53. And at that time, I knew I had to move on because it was customary that you, as a law clerk, only stayed 10 to 12 months. The idea being that they'd get a new graduating senior and bring him in to give everybody a chance, and that's fine, so I knew that. But I kind of put it at the back of my mind, and so I was well acquainted with the court staff, especially May Davis, I guess that was her name. She was the clerk of the court, and I mean, she ran the court. But she was real nice to us law clerks. There were only two of us that I can remember. Well, Dan Cracchiola was one for a while, and Nancy Fulbright was clerk for a while. But Eldon Clausen and I were the ones that were there for the most length of time. And so I went in to take some papers to her, was about it. And so she stops whatever she's doing saying, Earl, what are you going to do now? I guess you got to move on. And I said, yeah, I sure do. And she said, got any ideas? And I said, no. And she said, well, I saw Ross Jones. Well, I didn't know who Ross Jones was until she said he's the Attorney General of the state the other day. And I mentioned that you were going to be looking for a job. And he said, well, send him down. I may be able to use him. So lo and behold, she sent me down. I got hired.
So you were at the AG's office, how long?
AG's office.
Yeah.
And almost immediately, as far as I can recall, I was assigned to the highway department and spent about a year there. I spent, total time was from, what did I say, May, probably June or something like that. I joined the Attorney General's office. And Ross Jones ran for office in '54 and lost. So at the end of '54, why we had to look for a job. But Ross Jones, being the great humanitarian he was, he placed every one of his, and I don't know how many he had in the Attorney General's office, but with maybe an exception or two who said we've already got something. And he placed me with this Henderson Stockton to go down and interview with him. So I worked there in the Attorney General's office for a year at the Highway Department, and then I was brought into the main office, and that's where you would sit there as your office and you represent small departments. The liquor department, I can remember. I think I did some work for the Corporation Commission, and they didn't have the facility to put an attorney full-time in that particular building, or did it justify it as far as the time of the attorney. He'd better off in there doing a little bit of work for this and that. And so that was the story until he lost the election, and he got busy and found me a job with Henderson Stockton. And the reason he found that job was that a guy named, oh gosh, if I ever forget that when I'm dead, Judge, oh my gosh, I won't stumble over it any longer, but he was judge of the Superior Court, and he wasn't judge of the Superior Court. He was elected at the election of '54. So he was the one that was moving out of Henderson Stockton's office. That's the story. And I moved in, and I remember he was the judge, still moving his stuff out and talking to me about what kind of work I'd probably get and so forth. And real nice, friendly guy. And That's where I met him, and 30-some years later, I was called to give a talk about him when he was retiring, and went to the bar, meeting and that sort of thing. So we were good friends. He saved my neck because when I was in Henderson Stockton's, I needed anything I could get because Henderson just paid me. Was Stockton and Karam, it was two names, but I always think of Henderson Stockton as the boss. And they only paid me on an hourly basis. Well, only when they needed me to do some research or go sit in a trial or something. And that wasn't enough, and they told me that, you'll have to supplement it. So I did, and it worked out all right, but it worked out all right because Warren McCarthy was the judge, called on me one day and said, I suppose you're full of work and plenty to do, and I said, no, I don't. And he laughed, and he said, well, I'd like to give you some appointments. And, oh, that'd be great. So I think he's the one that first lined me up with defending criminals. Indigent, is that the proper term for it? And so I took on about 3 of those, not at the same time, before I wised up to the fact that all these guys were doing was stalling for time to see what kind of a plea. And the first time, I tell the story because maybe somebody else will avoid getting hooked, is that you get appointed that, and they say, you can go over here and sit down still in the courtroom and talk to your, decide what he's going to plead. Of course, he's going to plead not guilty. And then he starts telling you, well, he doesn't get a chance to. You get up there and you enter the plea of not guilty. And then you agree that you'll meet him in the jailhouse, in a room they have. And then he starts telling you all these great witnesses he's got. He wasn't there, and that sort of thing. So I write them down. I got addresses, everything else. So I go to the first place, and there's no address. I mean, there's no building, there's nothing there. And the next one I go to, they never heard of the person, and about the third one. So I come back to him, and I can't understand that. He must have done this and that. He must have been making a mistake. And he's stuttering around, and finally he says, you think you can cop me a plea? And I was wise enough to know what that meant. And I said, but you told me you're innocent. You don't want to plead to something you didn't. Oh, you know how it is. He said, they're going to get you one way or the other. I figured that if I cop a plea, I'll probably be out in a year or two, and that's about the best I can hope for. You just can't beat the game, and that sort of thing. And I said, I was really trying to convince him. I said, but you got these witnesses, just a little more effort. No, he said, see what you can do. And then the next guy I get, it's the same thing. He chases me around for a while. So by the third one, I thought, to heck with this. I can make money doing something else. So I think I told Warren I wasn't going to be eligible for that, and he kind of laughed about it. He said, well, suppose I give you something else. He says, we got some patients out at the state hospital that need to be represented. They're women, and they were doing hysterectomies on them, and they had to have a lawyer. And all their rights have to be prepared, even then. But can you imagine, they appoint me, who's not even dry behind the ears, to represent these women. Oh yes, there's a doctor that's going to testify, and there's a woman who, she doesn't even know who you are. I mean, literally, I introduced myself. That's all I got out of any of them. And I don't know how many appointments I got. And they were money makers because I didn't have to do anything except show up for the hearing.
They were in the state hospital, did you say?
Arizona State Hospital.
So you were appointed guardian ad litem for purpose of getting
No, I was
consent?
just appointed attorney to represent her, not guardian.
Huh.
No, I later got guardianship of one of them, but that was a different thing. Am I getting off of your table?
No, this is exactly. So you've done just about everything, I think. Represented criminals and represented.
Yes, and these women that didn't know who I was. And, I wouldn't anymore call them for a witness. They couldn't remember their name. How would they remember my name? How would they know what they were there for?
Terrible.
They just sit there, everybody's testifying and they're smiling and anything they do.
So what'd you do next?
Let me think about it, because it was that hurdle then, wasn't it? Oh, well, all right. Practice got better. I think it was because my wife went to work for this Medical and Dental Association. The next thing they needed was an attorney to do collection work for them. So I became the collection attorney, and that began to get me some money. In fact, the last year before I joined this law firm, I made $10,000 gross. And the first year I worked for the Kramer, Roach and Perry, I think I got $8,500. So I set back a little bit there, but I always felt good about it because I'd heard that they're one of the old-time, well-established law firms, and they were. They were really good. So anyhow, I was getting along good, and I got a phone call from Ross Jones, Attorney General. I told you, he always looks after his chickens. And he said, "How you doing?" I said, "Oh, pretty good." And he said, "What are you doing?" And I told him, and he said, "Well, that's good, that sounds good." He said, "But I just happen to know that Kramer, Roach and Perry, especially Walter Roach, needs an associate." And he said, "They're a fine firm." And I'm thinking to myself, you know it. I understand it. So he said, "Well, why don't you go over and see Walter?" He said, "I kind of recommended him to you. Or rather the reverse, recommended me to him." So I called up, and sure enough, he was happy to see me. Very pleasant person. I'm sorry, I get emotional. I shouldn't, but those things just happen.
Sure.
Anyway, Walter interviewed me and said, "Okay, you're going to be hired, and you're going to work for First National Bank." I thought, well, that's impressive. What am I going to do? And he said, "That's about it. You can start work tomorrow, whatever it be the next one, or Monday, something like that." Well, I might not have been that quick because I did have to do something. Well, they said, Walter said, "Bring your collection thing." And of course I had to tell Stockton Karen, but they were expecting it, so it wasn't any problem with them. Next thing I knew, I was there in an office that had no windows. It was opposite the lobby, and the lobby had 3 desks, 3 secretaries, so that when you opened my door, there were the secretaries, but none of which, I'm pretty sure, were ever my secretary. We had about 2 other secretaries that did most of the secretarial work. But you didn't need a fancy office, you know. I didn't think about it. I wasn't critical of anybody. I thought, I've got a job. And it lasted 33 years.
Wow. Up here. Well, so
Clear
Ross
up to-
Jones.
Not this building, but
Yeah.
the one at 100 West Washington is where I retired, yeah.
Yeah, he made your career, huh?
And you know, it was a good combination because I had been brought up to believe, and I don't remember my parents preaching it to me any more than maybe I just picked it up from a lot of people, that you stick with the same employer as long as they treat you right, and you got a life job. I never thought of doing it otherwise.
It certainly has changed these days, I'll tell you for sure. Everywhere it's a different
Shocks
story.
me what happened.
Mhm.
See, I retired March of 1990, and the big bubble burst in about July. If you've heard it, maybe you haven't heard it, 20 attorneys, let me get it straight, 20 partners left the law firm, and one of them was the named Mariner Carden. He was once a named partner. We just didn't have the business. This was the period when the government took over the Western Savings and all the savings and loans and all of those. That was in 88, 89, that sort of thing, and it really hit the fan. So that it was a case that those that were in departments, and that's what you call it, had jobs, and the rest of them were given this option of taking the best we can offer you, and I'm sure they did. But with partners, I don't know how they worked it out because they had years of credits, or whatever you want to call it, of being a partner. And but it worked out because all of them got other jobs, and really I was really surprised as I came across those that we didn't have a lot of criticism, and they weren't critical. They realized how bad it was and what it took to keep the boat afloat. And meanwhile, I guess I skipped along fast enough to not tell you that, yeah, I really missed an important part. I was, no, I've been hired by Walter Roach, that's right. I guess I'm still in tune with that. And we were Kramer, Roach, and Perry when I was joined. That was 57. 58, Dan Cracchiola joined the firm, but he automatically became a partner because he was an experienced trial attorney and what the firm wanted, additional one, in addition to Hayes Birch. And it became Kramer, Roach, Birch, Strike, and Cracchiola. Yeah, that's it. And that took place 58 and lasted until January 1, 1970. And then there was a splitting of the firm. And
Dan went off then, Cracchiola,
and Birch,
and Birch and Cracchiola, right?
and Bob Geyer, and Paul Levi were the four. Now there might have been some associates, but those were named partners that went with one, and the rest of us, which was Harvey Strike, myself, and Tom Lang, and I think Prestine Hoke and Jim O'Valley had been made partners about that time, and and a whole bunch of others. We were the vast majority. They had 4, we probably had 24, 25, and we took over. Oh, I don't know if you know, but the way you work that is you send a letter, and it's a joint letter by the two groups. That's all explained in the letter that we're splitting and so forth, and that we write this letter to you seeking to find out who you want to represent you. We try and make it as fair in the way we say it and so forth, that we don't assume anything because somebody's been doing the work, and then would you please do the following, and they're to respond and tell us what they want. And that's the way it worked. And we got all, as far as I'm concerned, we got all the solid clients. We lost yeah, well, maybe again I'm skipping around, kind of weaving this because we lost Western Savings, but we had First National, which became First Interstate, and they grew and grew and grew. It used to be, when I was hired, just about anybody called me except the president, I guess. Even officers of vice president status would call me with questions, and managers would call me more than anybody else at the branch. It was funny, but that was the way it was run. It wasn't very efficient, even from the bank standpoint. I went before, with Harvey, we went to see the chairman of the board, and he was complaining about the fees and everything, and what could they do, could we do to help him? And I know I spoke up and said, well, you have an awful lot of duplication. And I gave an example. So-and-so at 7th Avenue in Camelback calls me one day and said, what do I do about this? And I said, well, let me look into it and so forth. And we take care of the matter. And I said, a week or so later, a month later, why a branch manager from Glendale or somewhere else calls, he's got the same identical thing. And I said, we've been through that, but we go ahead and represent them and do whatever we have to do. But as a practical matter, if you had an office and you had somebody, a group of people that were well enough educated to do this, all they have to do is keep records of what's been taken care of before and apply it. And if they get stuck, then call the attorney, maybe in the interpretation type of thing. But otherwise, sometimes it's just cut and dried. They could see right away that there's the answer. Or they can call the attorney that handled it in a few minutes on the phone while it's taken care of. And we aren't handling it per se, having to go to the branch, having to do those things. Well, that made a big difference. That's the beginning of the legal department. Mm-hmm. And frankly, I believe it was probably the first one in the valley. We had a lot of firsts here. I was responsible, I believe, because I was kind of sensitive about it, but I had a department, it was a bank and a bunch of other type of operation that was similar. The bank wanted to collect money that was owed to them, and all these different corporations wanted, so that fell to me, and worked out all right. But I finally realized that these guys they'd send me, and again, guys, I'm sorry, but that's what it was, to be new graduates, and we've hired them, and then they've got to go to work, and they all think they want to be in the trial section, they all want to be this and that, and then they're sent to the collection agency, or collection group. And they do their job, but I knew they were just waiting their time out, 10 months or thereabouts, and then they'd move on. And that just meant I had to break somebody else in, so I approached Harvey Strike, the managing partner, and I said, well, I got an idea. I said, I can do far better by following the traits of one of the attorneys who handled mortgage foreclosures. And he had nothing but women. And because it was all paperwork, they all began to understand it. They didn't have to solve legal questions. That was for the lawyer. And so, give me 3 women, let me pick them. And I said, I think I can run the department without it. He said, all right, go. I went. Pretty soon we had a number more than that. We were cranking it out. We were charging for their time. The firm wasn't hurting a bit. The bank was happier than anything because they had grown, and they had maybe 20 people in their department of the legal department that started out with 1 or 2, and it just blossomed into that. And what I'm saying is, we ultimately started calling them, I think, technicians, legal technicians or something. You had to have a name. And I started inquiring, and there just wasn't any law firm in the valley that had anything like that. And they asked me, well, how'd you do it? I said, I trained them myself. You know, what else? If I got a new person, the ones I took had some experience along the lines that I was talking about. But they still had to get acquainted with my procedure and the type of way we handle our files and the type of forms of pleadings and everything. All the way was cut and dried and worked beautifully, real smooth. And the benefit to the client was that they refer a matter to us to file a suit on something, and they know we're going to take care of it. And the first question they've got within a week or so is, well, did we file the suit? Did we get them served? Well, you know who answered it after that? It wasn't the lawyer. Mm-hmm. Who would have put down some time for that. No, it was the technician. And the receptionist knew that. They'd say, well, you want to talk to so-and-so. Well, no, I want to talk to Mr. Weeks. No, just take my word for it. And so they'd say, yes, we filed it on such and such. She's got the file there, such and such a date. Yes, they were already served. Oh, good, I'm feeling better already, you know. They got a happy client, too. And that went on quite a while, and it was very successful. And it also was not just the bank, all these clients. I did a lot of work for General Electric, and I used the same principle with them, although some of my work was strictly legal that I had to handle. But other than that, the collection area, like they had big suits against these oversized trailers. When the dealer went out, there were hundreds of thousands of dollars in the hole. And we still use pretty much the same principle, and that was that you talk to Beverly so-and-so, she's filed a suit. All she's going to tell them is, we filed the suit, such and such a date, the person's been served, and that's where we stand. Or else they'll say, well, the next thing they want to know, well, how soon will we hear something? Well, they tell them you got 20 days or 30 days to answer. You know, you give them the picture. So don't call before that. And otherwise, if we hear that they've done something, we'll notify you. So all that worked to the benefit of the client and made us happy. And the gals put their time down because they were taking the time to do that, get that information, but at a very reasonable rate compared to what the lawyer would charge. So now, again, I think I'll take a break and ask you, are we about through, or where are we?
Well, I want to talk about just a couple of, this is excellent. This is exactly what I
Is it?
want. Yes, it is. It's great.
Well, my wife says I ramble, so
No, not at all.
are you sure?
I'm positive.
That's all part of it. That's
Yeah,
all.
it's,
Well,
That's how you think about new things. I mean, the
Right.
things that.
I see
People
your
tell
point.
more of a
I'm
story
just telling
that
it as
way.
it happened. I mean,
Right,
it's
right,
easier
yeah.
to do that than to
Right.
try and condense it. I
Right,
wouldn't
exactly
do a good
right.
job. But
No, no, no.
but I just, what do you think about the I mean, now your firms merged with Quarles and Brady. What do you think about that development, these national firms and larger places?
okay, the way I found out about it was a little before the time it was actually announced. As I understood it, and it was directly from John Dawson, a longtime friend of mine, partner, and I always have to mention this because John said it. He said, Earl taught me everything I ever knew. But if you ever inquire about John Dawson, he's one of the most outstanding bankruptcy attorneys in the country. I mean, you call for John, he's either in New York or he's in Florida or he's in California, and it's always been that way. I don't know how the guy's lived this long, frankly. He's never gotten married, which was a good thing. And Harvey and I used to have to nursemaid him practically to get him to take some time off to shave and so forth. Well, he wasn't that bad. I don't want to exaggerate it. I think John always shaved and took care of himself, but sometimes, Harvey sent him out to get a suit one time. He thought it was about due. John didn't have time for those things, you know. But John is just a wonderful person. And if you ever have a chance to meet him, why, I urge you to do so. Now, think about these things. What was it?
The big
Oh,
firm.
Jim LaValle wants to come in and say hello.
Oh, great.
And you know Jim.
Yes.
I'm sure you do. Because I called Jim, I guess it was, to tell him that you were coming up. And I said, the reason I'd call you is I know you've already had contact. Ever since, I don't know, he may have started when we had just the one law school, but probably not, because the first class at ASU was 71, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Jim had just barely made partner, I think, at that time. So he probably hadn't had a chance to begin to use his talents, but he soon was acquainted with both of the deans and both schools, and didn't play any favorite, and I think the schools benefited. Now, other attorneys probably took a great interest too,
Yeah.
from their respective
Oh, yes.
schools.
Oh, absolutely.
But Jim always sort of played both of them,
Yep.
keep us advised and all, and
And we appreciate it. Trisha's the dean at ASU, and we try to work together, especially with the big firms. They have to, they have lawyers from all of the different law schools, and
sure.
it's been, Strike-Lang's been very good to the U of A, very good.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, they'll be very appreciative. Well, just a few more things.
Yeah.
What would you say was your most difficult moment as a lawyer?
Mm. Well, it doesn't fall under the practice really, and yet I guess it does. I think my most difficult moment was to deal with the fact that here I'm retired, and yet, boy, it chewed me up when I heard what had happened in the summer of 1990 with all those lawyers, the associates and all. If you ask anybody, I got to know the associates I was on the softball team. They found even a position for me. I was a pitcher, and it was softball, you know, the one where you lob it up real high so the guy can't hit it. And you got to know your associates and your partners, and then they became partners and that sort of thing. I also had opportunities and took the opportunities to spend time with them and help recruit a lot of them. I was looking at notes that I had sent back to well, a bar examiner somewhere wanted some information on somebody. One guy, Jock Patton, they wrote about Jock was coming from California over here and joining us, and this guy had to write up something on recommendation, not for the firm, but I guess having to do maybe with taking the bar exam here. And then Prestine Hook, I saw his name there in something like that. Well, those were associates when they came to the firm, as far as I was concerned, because I made partner in 1960, and we didn't start recruiting until seriously until about 65. And in that class we got Prestine Hook and Jim LaValle, both from Iowa. But unusual, we went coast to coast, but we actually found two of them we just couldn't turn down, so we brought them both. And, but we started recruiting coast to coast, and did a pretty good job. We also recruited somebody from the Attorney General's staff, the U.S. Attorney, Bill French. He's still practicing here. I don't know if you know the name.
Is that right? Oh, yes.
Rings a bell.
Yes.
Well, he's done some things in Phoenix and Arizona that have, you know, been eye openers to people, and he's a wonderful guy. We had him and Peggy, his wife, come out to, as we did with everybody like that, to have them come out to join us, and took them out to dinner and things like that, which we all participated in. Or, well, some of them didn't want to, so Harvey and I and probably Tom and a few others did the recruiting, the home recruiting. Harvey did the recruiting on the road. I never left the office to recruit in that regard. I just tried to make them feel comfortable when they were here and meet some of the partners and get to know us and find out that we weren't such bad guys and that sort of thing.
Well, if you were going to give advice to a graduate of law school today, what would it be?
Yeah, that's kind of hard to answer because I know that not only the practice law has changed, but the presentation of the law in the law schools have changed. To say, well, go do this or get into that or something else, boy, I have no idea where the law is. I know it's specialized. It was specialized during my period of time. I got to see what happened when you specialized. As I said, I answered calls from everybody for the bank. I always refer to the bank because Walter said most of my work would be, and I guess it was always about 80% for many, many years. And that does make a difference. But I'm just hedging on how you would say, what would be your advice? I'd say, you see, even this has changed, and I don't know whether it sounds old-fashioned, to get out and just interview with some of the main law firms. Call them up and ask them if they're willing to interview. If they are, ask to put your name in and get acquainted that way.
I'm going to just ask one more. What was your happiest moment as a lawyer?
well, I had some successes that I felt very happy about. I guess some of the things that you might have been happy about didn't involve the magnitude of the case or the people or so forth. You were more satisfied because of what you accomplished for that particular person, and knowing the person themselves, their situation in life, and that you really do get acquainted with people, and you have to if you're a good lawyer. You got to know them, even sometimes their family and that sort of thing, so that
Would you do it
well,
again?
I guess I could say that I was the happiest was when I knew I had graduated from law school. I was a lawyer. That didn't mean I'd passed the bar, but you know, everybody thought they were a lawyer because they were eligible to take the bar, and I guess thereafter all the other things would be varying degrees of pleasure, happiness because of a job well done, and oh, I can remember one case where it was especially pleasing to me because this was a guy that had been tough on the lawyers on the bench, Henry Stevens. And in fact, when he came on the bench, it shocked everybody because his first order was always, you know, you got the bench there. And these old lawyers, the old ones anyway, were always coming up there and putting their arm like this, and then Henry'd say, "Mr. Weeks, would you kindly take your arms off the bench?" "Yes, sir, yes, sir." You know, step back. And of course, the ones that are sitting in there are learning from that you don't approach the bench. Well, and the judge might say to somebody for the first time that he knew about it and hadn't seen it, will you please approach the bench? Well, that usually means you're going to be a one-on-one, or you and the other attorney, and so you get up there for a confidential one. Mr. You have to address a couple of them and say, just remove your arm from the bench. It doesn't necessarily be that close. And so this is a gentleman that later became a Court of Appeals judge. And I had a case, and I don't remember, I couldn't give you the details of it, but I had won it in the lower court, and the other side was appealing. And we presented our arguments, and Henry just worked me over fairly well. He'd ask me one question, and then he'd jump on another question, and so forth. And then he didn't have too much to ask the other side. And of course, that always leads them to believe that's a good sign. You know, they were really trying to find out what kind of a case he had. And obviously he didn't have one. And so we walked out of there, and I said, "Well, you should be pretty happy. It looks like it's going your way." And he says, "Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good." The case came down. Not only was it in favor of my client, you'd have thought he copied the brief. The high points were there. And I'll tell you, that's something to really be happy about. Because I didn't have that guy's, you know, I didn't have him figured right. And it seemed like from that day on that Henry was always a little different toward me, friendly and everything. That I think he grew up too. I mean, you know, I think he was a little technical on the early aspects of it and a little too much impressed with himself. So that when I think about it, I remember I was just elated because I read that and I thought, but I wasn't looking at my brief. And I thought, boy, that sounds familiar. And I went back to my brief and went to the same topic matter. My God, he cited the cases and everything else. And so that didn't happen very often. I had my wins. In fact, somebody that I didn't even know came to me, and I guess it was in the law firm. I think he had joined the law firm and had done a lot of research. And he'd been in the Arizona law cases. And he says, you know, I don't believe you ever lost a case on appeal. I thought, son, you just haven't read enough of them. He said, I've read, you know, when he went on and on and on. I said, well, I was rather successful. I'll add this for it, speaking of that. In the Attorney General's office, yeah, I guess that's why it was. Partly they put me in there because I had been a clerk, and that was to handle their cases. And so when it went up on appeal, the county attorney yielded to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General said, Mr. Weeks, will you handle this? Now, I remember that I had one that had to do with the Highway Department. It was a challenge of the financial responsibility. And that was just passed about that time, 52, and was being challenged for the first time. But there was one case, like Iowa or somewhere, that had ruled in favor of the statute, which would require people to be financially responsible or they lose their license, amounted to. So I had that one case to hang my hat on, but the other side didn't even have that. They just argued that it was unreasonable, blah, blah, blah. So I won that case. That'd be one of the wins. And then, but I can tell you the loss, and that was, I was brought in to handle a criminal appeal. Well, that had nothing to do with what I was doing. Even if I had moved to the other department, you know, the liquor department, it had nothing to do with that. It's just that they wanted me up there because they felt that I had that experience. It's a smart thing to do. It's just like Old Home Week. You know, you can almost see the smile on their face when they try not to, but before or afterwards, they'd step down to the bench and shake hands with you, and how's everything? And that's kind of interesting too. Okay, I think that's about it.
All right. Are you glad that guy gave you that aptitude test? It sounds like it. That's great. Put it in, I know, of course, but I put it in the safe. Just go. Okay, tell us about it.
Okay, I'm going to tell you a story about the firm that I was a partner of 33 years. It started in 1906 with the formation of Armstrong and Lewis, and they lasted until about 1909 or 1910 when Lewis then became a territorial judge and served until statehood, and that's why he became known as Judge Lewis. And the things I'm going to talk about have to do with those two gentlemen, and Kramer became a partner in the teams. I'm going to refer to it as the teams and so forth. And what I'm going to tell you about has to do with a woman who was probably the first woman to take the bar exam in Arizona, and who also happened to be the daughter of the Supreme Court Justice Lockwood. Now, her name was Lorna Lockwood. Everybody know Lorna Lockwood? First woman in the United States to be a Supreme Court Justice. Well, it just, now the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. Lorna graduated, and I verified this. I thought it was 32, it was 25. You can look it up because she graduated from the U of A Law School. And so the story goes, and of course I got it from people in the firm, you understand, afterward. Came up here and did the thing that she thought she should do. She went to the different law firms, and I'm sure they treated her very friendly because her father was in the Supreme Court, but they just didn't have anything for her. So finally it ended up that her father hired her as secretary. Well, within, I don't know the period of time, whether it was a year or so, how long she had been working there, And maybe that was the cause of this act that was passed by the legislature, nepotism law. You certainly probably know what nepotism is, and it means you can't hire your family. And so then the story switches to where there's a conversation between Walter Roach and Judge Lockwood. And it goes something like this. This is Lockwood. Walter? Yeah, how are you, Judge? Oh, I'm all right, but I've had better times and things like this. I'm ad-libbing. He said, that damn legislature's passed this nepotism law, and now Lorna can't work for me any longer. Oh yeah, that's right, isn't it? Sorry to hear about that. Well, I got to do something about it. She can't stay on here, and I need a secretary. What do you suggest? And Walter said either, well, let me think about it, or else he had something on. I think he said, let me think about it, because he couldn't presume to believe that he would pull this off without the consent of the person who was going to be involved. Not Lorna, but you know, it was obvious that Walter felt that he had to help the judge out of this trouble, and the best way to do that was to swap secretaries. And so that's what they did. And Lorna came down to Phoenix. You know, they're out there, they just come down to the court, and she's working as a secretary there. Here she is, a graduate and passed the bar and everything else, and she's a secretary. I also heard this, and I wouldn't doubt it, but that was that after she'd worked there a while, she probably was responsible for preparing these pleadings or whatever they had to go to the court. So she was told by the attorney, could have been Walter, go ahead and take these over and file them. Okay. Well, on the way back, she had been working and all, and she stopped at Woolworth's and had an ice cream soda or something. And Walter Roach walked by and apparently looked in. And then when she got back to the office, he really chewed her off and said, "You're fired." And so she was. Well, that is in keeping with the fact that she, about that time, and I'm not giving you years, she joined up with a woman named Loretta Whitney. And Loretta Whitney is very famous in the law because she was not in the court, she was in the practice of law, and very well thought of, and she had a husband who was very well, Harold Whitney. And so they became partners and did a good job, and then they later associated with Lorna's cousins, I want to say, and there's three of them. I used to rattle it off. But anyway, then whether she was there with that firm when she was appointed to, my understanding, she was appointed to the Superior Court of Maricopa County. And that ties into one other story, and that was I had the privilege, questionable, of trying a case before her. And I knew her by then, and she was a very friendly person anyway. But I was representing the bank, and I was representing one of the older bankers, and I didn't know it, but he knew Lorna pretty well. So what happened was we went to trial, and we go into the courtroom, and there's hammer, you know, everybody stands up. Fortunately, Leo stood up too. I had no reason to doubt it, but later on I doubt my own sanity. I was surprised that he didn't just stand up and say, "Hello, Lorna, how are you?" But he refrained from doing that. She said, "Would you call your first witness?" Well, that was my only witness, was Leo Baumgartner, so I called him up there. Anyways, he comes up and he's sworn, and then he turns around and, "How are you, Lorna?" "Oh, I'm pretty well. How are you, Leo?" I could just imagine that other attorney sitting there thinking, "Oh my God, what have I gotten into?" So That's just the beginning. If they finally get him to sit down, I did probably, sit down now, we're going to ask you questions. And I'd ask him a question. Well, Lorna, it's like this. All he did was keep turning to her. And he'd always say, Lorna, oh, gee, I was chewing up inside watching this episode go. And finally, I think she was as glad as I was that I got to the last question and said, okay, that's all. I have no more other questions. I don't think the attorney ever asked a question of him. I can't imagine I would know how to answer a question or ask a question of the person. That's the end of the story. But it shows you that you wouldn't know that by virtue of just knowing this law firm.
Right.
And she was a pretty impressive woman.
Start again.
Do you want to hear it?
Yeah.
Start it again.
Okay, start it again.
Well, it won't be as long as this.
That's okay.
I had a case, and I was using a new procedure that had not been used before because we didn't have a law that would support it. And that was seizure of property without having a bond or trial and so forth. And anyway, the legislature had passed this act that on certain conditions you could go ahead and seize the property. So it's a brand new one. So I filed a suit, don't pay attention to who gets it because they pass it around to a judge, and I go over, and I guess I've learned that Sandra Day O'Connor is going to be the judge. I think, okay, fine, never met her, but I hear she's a nice woman. So I went to there and I handed the pleadings I wanted signed and any supporting ones to the clerk saying she may just want to look this over, because I'm used to having other judges just say, that's all right, I'll just glance at this, even if I was invited in, I'll glance at this and that's it. But we do it that way, and the next thing I know, said the clerk woman said, well, the judge would like to see you in the chambers. I said, okay, fine. I went in there, and she said, this I've always had great respect for her. She said, sit down, Earl. And thank you, Judge. She said, I haven't had a chance to read anything on this. And she said, I know nothing about it. You're the first matter. And she said, would you mind telling me what this is all about? Our Supreme Court justice. I did. And she thanked me. And she said, then she looked at it, because she did. She didn't just take my word for what's in the writing, that I had complied with a bond and certain other qualifications and so forth. She said, looks all in order, and she signed it. And that was it. That's the end of the story. But what impressed me was the fact that she was not too humble to she didn't try to sneak down the hall to get to another judge and say, what's this all about, or anything like that. She just flat told the first lawyer that she saw that I'd like you to tell me a little bit about this, because I haven't read anything about it. And she knew it was a sort of an earth-shaking thing to those people that thought you couldn't do it. And when it's all laid out, the legislature had it laid out that way. Okay, end of the story.
Right.